we want to unpack the conversation about Ukraine a little bit further. First and foremost, I want to say these conversations absolutely require nuance. Because without it, there's a level of disingenuousness that can sneak in from every single corner. And I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean that literally. We see when Republicans want to control the narrative, they ignore nuance. When it's time to get rid of the filibuster or do something for Black people, we've seen the Democratic Party ignore nuance too. That's a conversation for another day. What we cannot afford to do in the conversation about international affairs, foreign policy, and particularly Ukraine is ignore the nuance there. But we're not living in a world of nuance, are we? We're living in a world of sound bites. And that's one thing I want us to be cognizant of as we have this conversation, because personally, gentlemen, I'm torn. I am personally torn because I have been following the plot of the democratic movement there in Ukraine, at least since 2004. Now, I admittedly jumped off and started not paying attention somewhere around 2014. And so I don't ever claim to be an expert in that field. However, I'm torn because I understand the plight of the people who are on the ground who want to be free of Putin. But I'm also very clear on international affairs. Putin has some reach. That's his regional, that he wants to be a regional hegemon. He wants to be the regional power there. And with Ukraine bordering right there against Russia, you know, he has a play there. But then I'm not a pacifist, but there's enough war. We just came out of 20 wars. Now, I set the frame. And I want to go to you first, Brother Marcus, because we're having these conversations. And I just want to open the floor for you to speak. And then we could take the conversation from there. What are your thoughts as it pertains to the United States involvement in Ukraine, if any?
Well, I think that what the United States' involvement is mostly going towards, you know, building their own influence, right? You know, like this is where, you know, like I appreciate you leading in like with nuance, because like there's a lot of people on the ground that are getting pushed by both forces. You know, this isn't a Putin isn't the bad guy. It's that there's possibility there's more than one bad guy, and those influences are playing on this one area. And so I think within the context of history, you know, I don't think Putin believes there's a threat of invasion through Ukraine into Russia, but he's utilizing that historical narrative to push for more security. I think that the United States should have an understanding of that, utilize diplomacy, and do a one-for-one. You have remove the troops from the border, have some type of agreement as far as the amount of troops that can be doing training or even stationed. You know, we could, you know, that's more, you know, let's let the State Department figure out what the specific numbers are in exchange for a lot, like saying that Ukraine will not join NATO. You know, and this won't preclude, you know, the U.S. and Ukraine joining other, you know, doing their own other alliances or what have you. But I think in order to completely end this situation right now, that would be the fastest diplomatic effort, going partly in line with Russia wants, not all the way. And then, you know, I think the United States would get a little bit of what they want, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, I don't think that these ideological narratives, you know, like democracy versus authoritarianism, I don't think that these are actually like what's kind of happening on the ground. I think it's dealing more with resources, energy, you know, and the, you know, making money off of it. So Putin's looking for more access to the Black Sea. You know, this is something where it's like Putin's not a socialist. He's not really looking to build back the USSR. He's using that narrative to his own means, which is to enrich himself and the oligarchy within Russia.
See, that's exactly right, and that's why I wanted you to come on, because, you know, Brother Mac, I hail from some of the circles of the internet that some of my former colleagues, quite honestly, are peddling a narrative that is bothersome to me. I'm just letting it all hang out this morning because this is a sensitive topic. Some of my former colleagues are in my best estimation, sandbagging the conversation as it pertains to the United States. Because like Marcus said, there's more than one bad guy in Ukraine. Here's my thing. We can't go underneath this delusion that Russia is communist and socialist, because that has given a lot of my former colleagues room to say, hey, let's go easy on them over there. Let's not, why is America being so aggressive to Russia? And I'm looking at this situation, Brother Mac. I'm like, if I'm going to be honest with myself, Russia looks pretty aggressive here.
I mean, listen, when you put 100,000 troops in, now it's upwards of 130,000. And on top of that, to talk about his intent, now he's moved blood supply into that same area. And you got to understand, blood supply has a shelf life on it. So it ain't like he could just sit there for years and years and figure out what he wants to do. With that blood supply being there, all intentions are that he wants to go in. Now, I have a slightly different take on why he's doing it. I have no doubt that what happened on December 25th, 1991, when the sickle and hammer failed and the Soviet Union got dissolved, based on Putin's ego, and the man has an ego. I think he wants to reassemble that power, which is why he went into Crimea, and now here you are looking at Ukraine. And so I think the hypocrisy behind the United States, given us as Black folks, about our own human rights here. So now America is looking at, part of it is the whole human rights aspect of it. And they're going to have to do something, because trust and believe, China is sitting there watching. Because if you remember, the U.S. weighed in on China trying to take over Taiwan. And they stated these human rights violations on the Taiwanese. So they're sitting there watching, and trust and believe, China is watching. So if Putin does invade Ukraine and the U.S. does nothing, you best believe that China is now going to set their sights on Taiwan, and they're going to do the same kind of thing. So, the question for me is, what is going to happen if Putin enters Ukraine? What is the U.S. going to do?
Oh, if we could, I don't. Go ahead, Brother Marcus.
Well, hold on. But so the Ukrainian leadership, the official Ukrainian leadership, has asked the United States to stop talking about Russia invading. They're under the belief that Russia's not going to invade. Germany, is in the same boat. They're asking us to, at this point, I think it would be best if we don't escalate, because and the thing is too, is that what if the question of what's the U.S. going to do if Russia invades Ukraine? Joe Biden already said it. Nothing. The point of sending weapons to Ukraine is only to hurt Russia as much as they can in their exploits. He said it openly. If they want it, they're going to take it, but we can make it hurt. Now, that does not sound like it's an avenue in the best interest with the Ukrainian people. And so we really, off of what the Ukrainian leadership is asking for, we should stop talking about that issue and really talk about diplomatic and pressuring our officials to work in diplomatic ways. Yeah, because
Brother Marcus, listen, when they're saying we should stop talking about it because we're escalating it, you got 130,000 troops sitting right at your border. How much more of escalation could there be? And then what are Putin's demands? Putin is demanding that Ukraine not be allowed to go into NATO. And the only reason he's doing that is because NATO says you mess with one member of NATO, you mess with all of NATO. And so that's the reason why he doesn't want NATO. And he knows that that's a point. That's just a non-starter, right? That's a deal breaker from the jump. So his so-called demands of trying to negotiate are just absurd. But now,
Brother Mac, let
me just make this point, Marcus. But given what you said, I do agree that the U.S. is talking about putting down sanctions. And when they're talking about sanctions, I want people to kind of understand what the U.S. is doing. They're talking about putting a stranglehold on Russia. And that stranglehold, just imagine if they put sanctions on one of us. They said no gas station should sell gas to the Mac family. No grocery store should allow the Mac family to come in there and buy food. After a while, one with a reasonable mind, if that pain gets to hurting too much under these sanctions, let alone banks and everything else, one is going to have to acquiesce and get right with it. So I agree that, the fact that they're going to do sanctions. But if you do nothing, and unfortunately, the U.S. has put itself in a position of trying to be the police of the world. Well, you're about to be real. You're about to be tested for show right now.
Yeah, Brother Marcus.
So I guess my question is, Brother Mac, would you accept, the deal saying, hey, we won't accept Ukraine into NATO if Russia pulled back forces and agreed to not have that type of buildup on the border? Is that something that absolutely not? You would say Ukraine has to be in NATO?
No. Again, you got to remember, in order for a nation to be entered into NATO, you have to have a unanimous vote. And with Germany sitting on NATO, Germany is never going to vote for them because Germany is in line with Russia. That's where they get their oil and gas from. But as a matter of principle, it is not for the U.S. to tell any other nation that they can't be a part of the North Atlantic Trade Organization. I just find that a deal breaker. So I would never agree to that. Putin ought to be smart enough, and I'm sure he is, to know that because of the relationship he has with Germany, because they're providing Germany with all of their fuel, gas and fuel, he knows Germany is never going to vote to have Ukraine to be a part of that.
Yeah. Let me ask a question. Let me, Brother Marcus, because we're coming up on the end of the hour, and we're going to hold this conversation over for the next segment. Georgia Fort won't be with us this morning, but I want to pose a similar question to you, Brother Marcus. If it is the case that the Ukrainian people, the majority of the Ukrainian people, want arms to defend themselves from Russia, would you support the people?
It's a great question.
I think that this question, right, is as far as like what's going on, and like absolutely yes, right. I'm a big supporter of the people. Like, is it necessarily like, oh, would arms be the first thing? I would much rather like give the needs of what because there's like this concern of, well, the Russians play with the Ukrainian energy, they turn it off and on when they want. Well, I 100% know the United States has the capabilities to help Ukraine build their own sustainable energy grid. That can happen. It's just not going to happen because we built Javelins and F-35s instead. The same things that we want for our communities, which is not Javelin missiles, is the same things that I advocate for actually providing for other communities. And that's where I think this whole issue gets just misaligned, and it really just boils down into oil and gas markets, into now we're talking about war for oil again.
There is not a lot of conversation about the potential devastation, right? I do feel like our media here in the United States is playing a game of brinksmanship to the extent of I'm not hearing enough about the nuclear capabilities in this conversation. I treat Russia differently than almost any other conflict because of the potential of total war, for the potential of nuclear conflict, and because I don't think it's reasonable for us to assume that the global players are any more rational than our own, because some of our leaders, hell, if Donald Trump was in power, would any of us trust this moment to him? So I can't assume that we're dealing with rational actors. When we get into a conflict, we can't assume that rational heads are going to prevail. To borrow a phrase from my favorite television show, Doctor Who, when that first shot is fired, you have no idea who's going to die. You have no idea how far it's going to go. It seems to me that there should be a countervailing conversation that is vehemently advocating for peace, because we are dealing with the potential for World War III here.
I mean, Ben, make no mistake about it, the only country in the history of the world that ever dropped an atomic bomb is the United States, right? And so is that a possibility? I mean, when you start talking egos and the likes, I mean, just think about it from human nature standpoint, right? When we were kids growing up, we didn't have guns the way they got now. You got into
That's right.
an altercation, you handle it with fists. Then somebody decided one day to pull a knife. Next thing you know, somebody else pulled a gun, and now look where we are. So, when you're talking about rational minds and you got ego at play and human nature the way it is, trust and believe, if I got a big hammer, I'm going to use the big hammer. And in this case, all players involved, U.S., Russia, China, the thoughts of it are literally frightening. And I just pray, God, that it doesn't get to that point of World War III, because it would absolutely be catastrophic.
And Brother Marcus, this is the rub for me. This is where the conflict is in me, which is why to be honest with you, I'm glad to have all of you on the show, because you guys can help me flesh this out for myself. Because as much as I know, I want there to be peace. Sometimes great men on the international stage do not allow that peace to exist. And so therein lies the problem. If Putin does not allow there to be a peace, what are those of us who are like, damn it, we want peace at all costs? What are we to do?
Well, the question of what do we do? I think it's kind of complicated, because who's we? When you're describing we, who's we? Is it the United States government? Is it the left? Is it progressives and the left? Because right now, progressives.
Let's narrow it down to black people. Actually, don't limit it. Don't limit it. Do it in all the categories that you feel led. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah. So I'm saying, if you're talking about the left, people who understand that this duopoly is not working for us, we don't get to do anything. At best, we could crowdfund some airline tickets, and here you go, my Ukrainian brother. You got a couch for a few months. All right. If you get a work visa and help out on some bills, that's what we can do right now. So what should we do? I think advocating for diplomacy, and I think being able to just try and be more knowledgeable on what's happening on the global stage, but also not ever buying into the narratives, because if we know that cops lie, then why are we just going to feed into the narratives of the world police the same way? We gotta be able to start developing and hope, not only just our separate ideas that actually drive towards peace. And like I said, what are sustainable energy initiatives that would actually solve the energy problems?
That's right.
For the Ukrainian people,
Can we not get around the underlying problem?
So Brother Marcus, and I think this is a very fundamental question that I don't think we covered. But what is Putin's interest in Ukraine?
Honestly, I think there is just a lot of money in it. There's a lot of money of getting more coastline and getting more access to the Black Sea. I understand where Putin is saying outwardly, hey, there was the Civil War, which the conflicts is still going on. Some of these groups involved consider themselves Russian, right? And he plays into those things. He plays into the history of Russia, of how many times it's gotten invaded through Ukraine, right? He plays into these narratives. But what is the goal? Enrichment. Out of all of the things that Putin does that is absolutely fucking terrible, what's consistent through all? Him and the oligarchs get more money and power, and it does not matter whatever U.S. sanctions is goes on. So we really need to start
safely outside of it. Yeah.
What is something that we can start building? What are organizations and structures we can start building so that we can actually do something? I'm all about that conversation. But we're right now sitting back and saying, well, it's either javelins or nothing, and that's just not a good conversation to have.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Brother Mac, I think that's a great question. I have some thoughts into what I think Putin actually wants here, but I know for the sake of time, we'll dovetail that a little bit more. I want this to be an ongoing conversation. I need us to not allow the idiocy of oversimplification to infect this conversation, because there is nuance. And it's going to make people like me. I'm uncomfortable. You can't tell me to be okay with sending American weapons to Ukraine. That's anathema to me. However, you can also not tell me that we should ignore the people of Ukraine, because I know for a fact that there are very real people who absolutely want to stand up against Putin. So we'll expand on this conversation day by day, little by little, and we'll have more guests. Brother Marcus, thank you so much for joining us. Before I go to this next story, Brother Marcus, tell everyone where and how and when they can listen and support your work.
So on twitch.tv/leftflankvets, today I'll be on at 2, Thursday, and then, going forward, I'm actually gonna be starting around like noontime, but just doing my Capitol Hill stream, in which case we do a very detailed look as what's the workings of the U.S. government for the day, and then also we stream at night, especially like Tuesdays and Saturdays for sure. And then also Left Flank Vets on Twitch or Twitter, excuse me, if you want to see our ridiculous memes.
I love the memes. Honestly, I'm here for the memes. And I need to find you on Facebook because full transparency, sometimes I steal your memes from Twitter and I take them to Facebook because I don't have them on Facebook,
we stopped messing with Facebook, okay. We're on a very limited crew.
I'm seizing the memes.
There are memes, okay. Comrade.
And Brother Marcus,
I am seizing the memes of. Go ahead, Brother Beck.
And Brother Marcus, let me just say, I certainly appreciate learning as much as I can from you and Brother Starr. I think the insight that you bring is very thought-provoking, certainly gives a level of understanding. And I just want to say how much I appreciate your body of work and bringing this conversation to our folks.
And Brother Mac, I appreciate. I was thinking, I was like, man, it's like talking with my dad or my uncle, which is like, you can disagree. We could talk through these things, right? It's like, and even not that we're disagreeing, we're just trying to bounce ideas off each other until we can get to a better answer. And so thank you all for just giving me the opportunity to do that with you this morning.